Hi everyone, John here from Gaming in the Wild, and I've got a very special video for you today. I was lucky enough to be able to interview Remy Siu, the director of 1000xRESIST, a game that I've been talking about a lot, a game that I have loved. It's a narratively deep sci-fi adventure with intertwining themes, with a lot of different reference points, with time skipping. It's confusing and brilliant, and there is so much to talk about in this game. So it was a real pleasure to sit down with Remy and discuss the game in depth. It's a long conversation, we talked for about an hour, so I'm going to set the interview to footage from the game. It might loop, but it's something for you to look at while you hear us talk. I hope that you enjoy it. I will also mention this is a patron-supported show, so if you enjoy the video, you can go to patreon.com/gaminginthewild to unlock a whole bunch of perks like bonus episodes, behind-the-scenes blog posts, and get an invite to our patron-only Discord server. So if you're interested in unlocking bonus content and supporting this channel, it starts at $1 a month, and I will put a link in the description. And with that said, let's get on with the video. So I'm very happy to be joined this week by Remy Siu, creative director of 1000xRESIST at Sunset Visitor. Hello Remy, thank you for making the time.
Hi John, really happy to be on the show. I really love the podcast, and as I was saying to you earlier, it's really wild to interact with your voice.
Yeah, it's super fun to talk to you, and I really do appreciate you hopping on because it must have been a crazy time for you. The game has just come out. Everyone is talking about it. There's a lot happening online. It looks from Twitter that you have a lot of people playing your game. The reviews have come in hot as well. So how has this time been for you?
It's been pretty wild. I think, we're really floored by the reception. We hoped for good reception, but we were also ready, I guess, that some of the things that the game talks about wouldn't be maybe picked up on immediately. But it seems like it has. It seems people really get it in a lot of ways, and or find their way into getting it, which is really amazing. But I think, many of us are very, very tired, and so we've just been resting, kind of been off. And we'll probably be off for a while, just resting and kind of, it's been a 3-year-long development cycle. And for me, it's been 4 years, if we count like the beginning of the prototype. Mm-hmm. So, but I think reading all the reviews or just reading people's reception to it has been just like, wow, I didn't anticipate the thoughtfulness that people are writing about it. Like that's really been one of the most amazing things.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, I was playing pre-release and felt like this was something very special and complex and layered and unusual. And I thought, I don't know if the world is going to grok this.
Right.
I hope they do. So I myself was holding my breath for the reviews just to see what people made of this game, So I can only imagine having made it, what that must have been like.
Yeah, we had I think, and the Chris and everybody from Fellow Traveler would admit that it's a very difficult game to market. And we really struggled to market it throughout the whole time. And to their credit, they kept changing strategies when things were not working. And we were able to kind of accumulate, a small audience for launch. And I think that's growing now. But it's really difficult because, like, as you know, after having played it, like we didn't want to talk about a big portion of the game, and we didn't want to spoil people. And there are some portions of the game that maybe we shouldn't talk about in public right away, super openly, right? And so that was a real challenge, like in terms of like grokkableness. And I know that people say this still online where it's really hard to describe. Like it seems to not want to be grokked that way. I don't know. Yeah.
Right. And speaking of that stuff, actually, we can say that if people are listening that have not played the game, then it is safe for a while. We're going to just talk about some general things. But if you have played the game and you would like to hear some more in-depth stuff, then we will drop a spoiler warning halfway through. So you're safe for now, and we will tell you when you are not safe. So
yeah.
So in that spirit, I mean, I've been looking at your website today just before we chatted, actually, and checking out some of your previous work. Also, just the general approach of Sunset Visitor and seemingly the makeup of the team seems to be rooted strongly in arts digital arts, performing arts. And I was wondering if you could talk a little about that, about your own path to game development, and the formation of the team around the game.
Yeah. I guess it's been a really long path to game development, for me at least. Early on when I was younger, I was interested in writing fiction, only because that was the only kind of thing I could do by myself. It was like in the 90s, so there was really no way for you to make video games. I think that's really different now for kids who are like, oh, I want to make video games. Like, you can go try, even if you're like, I don't know, 10. And so, but that was really not an option at the time for me. And then I went to go study music at Simon Fraser Contemporary Arts, Simon Fraser University here in Vancouver. And I got really lucky because that was an interdisciplinary arts program. I mean, that school was founded sometime in the 60s. So it still has a little bit of this kind of Fluxus hippie kind of attitude. And part of that in the spirit of the arts was we had kind of things like the World Soundscape Project there by Armory Schaefer. And we had other kind of music pioneers like Barry Truax working there and working on granular synthesis. Real-time granular synthesis, I should say. And that also was paired with kind of other departments like the arts department, visual arts department, theater department, everybody kind of doing weird, kind of wacky things. And we all kind of collaborated together. So I think one of the earliest things that on this path to game development was working with a composer on these theater projects at school, and having to have a setup, kind of like a live electronic setup with my laptop and some MIDI controllers, trying to keep up with the actors, because they were engaging in some kind of devised process, which is one that doesn't have a script and doesn't have a traditional director in the way that you may know it in traditional theater. It has a lot of, we're going to go off and riff on one subject or one constraint or something. And then the performers, I don't say actors, but performers, go off and try to make this together. And as a composer, I would try to go with them and, of course, improvise, I guess, music or whatever I had to keep up with them. And that's where I met a lot of the collaborators that I still work with today. But that's also where I met one of the writers on this game. I'm going to use their pseudonym, Pinky Lee. So Pinky and I have been working together for, 15 years at this point. And another writer on this game, Connor Wiley, we had been working together on for 15 years. And so we had all attended that same school and kind of were in and around the same cohort.
Right, and so some like-mindedness from that time, perhaps?
Yeah, but I should just make sure to say that, the team itself was injected with a lot of energy and, newness, in the sense that we had Colin, the programmer, who is kind of someone from games, who has 12 years of experience in games, and is we really couldn't have done it without him. And same with Kodai, who is somebody who is just an illustrator and an artist and a 3D modeler and an environment artist who just could do it all as well. And Tan, who was our producer and did a lot of work in voiceover as well. So yeah, I think the team coming together is a mix of both, these older kind of collaborations that are ongoing, and newness for sure.
Mm-hmm. And there is an interesting side of this, which is obviously making games is hard, famously hard, technically, and in the multidisciplinary way of it all, and in the organization of it all, and the financing of it all, and the publishing of it all is just a big process. And anytime you talk to someone who works in games or watch interviews with people who work in games, making games is hard is a common refrain. It's very interesting to me, the composition of Sunset Visitor, from your just the multidisciplinary background you're talking about, meeting in that kind of school and taking it forward in this way. I wonder what the missing links are between working together with friends that you've met in school and who have all no doubt developed their own practices in different ways, and managing to cohere that under an umbrella as a studio and to make a game happen.
The missing link. I think that's where some of the background in kind of new media creative coding in my own practice helped, where, I was able to try and translate what the writers were wanting to do and speak to, say, Colin about it, and kind of look at the feasibility of something they may talk about. And then vice versa, kind of sometimes I would have to push back against the writers and be like, hey, well, I don't think that may actually be simple to do in theater, but actually, that's really, really hard. Like, we can't, for example, base an entire scene or like an entire dramatic turning point of a scene based on somebody drinking water, for example. That would be really bad. That would be really, well, not bad, but I guess really painful to execute. We would have to have all sorts of new systems to kind of make sure that we could do that.
Right. So a technical negotiation with
Yeah, but I will say it was challenging. It was really challenging. As in, like, any kind of ensemble in say the arts as well. Like, we faced a lot of challenges trying to, especially with the fact that the game was so large. And it turned out a little bit larger, well, like maybe quite a bit larger than we thought. So like, I would say I don't really have like that many answers, but I only have more questions after the process, right? Which is like, how can we adhere these even better? Like, how can we, like, one of the things about devised theater processes that and I was talking to Colin about this the other day, is that we understand that devised theater processes are really messy. Like, that you get certain things. Like, I think you get things like this game out of it, but it's really messy because you don't really have a North Star always. And especially in the middle of it, you just feel like you just don't know what's going on, or like how to juggle all the things that you kind of threw into the air.
Mm-hmm.
And what Colin said was like, that sounds like game development. And I think that's really interesting because, like, sometimes when people think about games, we think about like film as the next analogous kind of medium, or like a kind of adjacent medium or whatever. But, the more and more I think about it and the more and more I experience it, I do think devised theater, and there are many kinds of devised theater, right? And that's kind of the point. And there's also many kind of games, which is also kind of the point, right? It's not just, it doesn't feel like just one medium. The variables are so vast that these two approaches do have something in common. And that's kind of something to continually unpack, right? Like, in devised theater, we do essentially prototype. We try to, like, spend time box, I don't know, 2 hours to make a 5-minute something on stage. And then we iterate on that over and over and over again, like, or we throw it away. And that does feel like something that we do in games as well.
Yeah, I mean, from watching some game development documentaries, like the really good one about Double Fine, where you get to see how the sausage is made and see how long it takes. And as you were saying, navigating between ideas and if it's 2 hours to rehearse or experiment before a theatre performance, improvised performance, then that's just not the case when you're dealing with building stuff in this same way. It just seems like it would take so much longer. But it's interesting to hear you compare the processes of art, play, and experimentation, and with game development, to find parallels within that for sure. And in fact, one of the first questions that I've got here for you, I think that we're still safe pre-spoiler, but we are getting into the game just a little bit. And it is about the layeredness and just how much is in the game, and that from the beginning. There is a lot thrown at you in this game. There are lots of intertwining themes and ideas that will emerge during a playthrough to a degree that is almost overwhelming in a good way. And it seems like such a complex thing. The question, as I've written it here, is something that you've already been talking about, and it's about taking some seeds and inklings and seeing that grow and working with other people. So I was just wondering about that very first point.
I mean, one thing that I may have said elsewhere before, and also I think about a lot in retrospect, where it's, something like a 90s television show is like a good analogy for some of the, like, as we were going through the game, I was like, oh, this feels, not that I ever, worked on a 90s television show, but, like, this feels like it could be what it feels like to work on a 90s television show, where it's like we were doing, each chapter fully before we would do the next. So we were not, say, doing them out of order at all. I think there was one we did out of order, chapters 3 and 4, but most of the time we were finishing an entire quote unquote episode of something before moving to the next one. And I think that's kind of, why it turned out the way it did in a lot of ways, where we could kind of look at the whole chapter and be like, okay, well, now that we're done it and we can sit back and look at it, what do we think is going to happen next? And what do we think people will think will happen next? And what did we discover this time, right? And, without going into, I don't think this is a spoiler. Is it, like, at the end of chapter 1 spoiler? Would that be okay to talk about at this point?
Listener, if you are sensitive about the end of chapter 1, then this is a little spoiler, but not a big one.
So the moment where Watcher turns Fixer in with Principal in the gym scene, that was not planned at the beginning. And that's an example of, like, oh, we made the whole chapter. We got to feel what it was like to play through that chapter. And then at the end of the scene, we're like, okay, or at the end of the chapter, what's like the most interesting thing that could happen here? Mm-hmm. And what could, make us a little scared as writers. And that was the choice I guess we made. Like, like the more common thing, and this is what we were thinking as writers too, which is why people think this before they get to that moment as well, that she wouldn't turn Fixer in, but then the more that we thought about it, it was like, oh, maybe she would, and maybe that's exciting. That kind of kept happening throughout the game. And then also maybe that's how we got to this layering, as you're speaking of, right? Like, just keep trying to think about what had come before, what might come next, and then play in the space in between.
Something else that's come up when I've been thinking about the game and talking about the game is the manner of speech amongst the characters in this game. There's some really interesting dialogue, both in the writing and in the voice acting. The voice acting struck me immediately as being very unusual, not something that I've seen in games before, with its muted, quiet, melancholic, conversational acting that we have, which is really, really interesting direction and performance that is in the game. And also just the cult-like phrases that they say. The sisters in the game have their phrases like the hekki grace and the hair to hair, and the sphere to square, which I found myself muttering unconsciously throughout my playthrough and since. And if you look on social media, you see a lot of it. Everyone's saying hair to hair to each other and sphere to square to each other.
It's wild.
It seems like they have like a meme quality. Mm-hmm. There's like a little line from a pop song that gets stuck in your head in these phrases, But something that I've had several conversations about this is people just being curious about hekki, which seems like it's maybe a common typo of hello in internet parlance, which if you Google it comes up as a Finnish word.
Right.
What's going on with hekki?
Well, okay. I mean, this is also, very much into the devise process. So one day, I guess we were supposed to have a meeting with the writers, and so I went onto the message. It was like Slack or something. I can't remember. Whatever. It was a messaging app that we were using. And I went to type hello, but I accidentally typed hekki. And then those two just, roasted me all day for that. and that's kind of how it became part of the game.
Right. You typoed it literally into existence.
Yes, I typoed it literally into existence, and they wouldn't let it go. And so it became, I think part of it was that I think it was a full sentence. I was something like, hekki, good morning, everybody. Like, I can't remember. But, that's, that happens a lot in these device processes. Like, you go and make a joke, or you make a joke about something, or you accidentally do something. And then it just like ends up into the game and or into whatever you're working on and spins out. I hope I didn't remove any of the magic of that hekki.
Not at all. What's interesting is that we've been chatting about this in the Patreon Discord for the podcast. And Brad Galloway, a friend of mine who's a podcaster as well, was blown away by hekki. He was like, oh, wow, me and my friends used to use hekki because someone typoed it once and it just stuck. And I was Googling it online thinking, has this grown from being such a common typo that it's become like an Urban Dictionary worthy?
Well, if you look down at the keyboard, at least in like an English keyboard, like the K and the L and the O, it's just like right next to each other, right? So like you could easily just miss and accidentally say hekki instead of hello. I think it made sense to us. We were like, oh yeah, like one of the biggest things that we were always thinking about in this game is like mistakes that happened that just spin out into history and become important. And I guess that was my mistake that that just span out into the game. But it's good on the writers to like grab it, I guess.
And I feel like the conversation is naturally leading us into spoilers. So maybe it is time to just drop that spoiler warning. So if there are people listening that have not played 1000xRESIST, then please do. It is a very special game. Maybe pause the podcast, maybe play the game, maybe come back afterwards. We're just being very, very sensitive here about spoilers because there's a lot that you should be discovering yourself in this game. It's a fantastic game. And so please do duck out. But for everyone else who is staying, you touched on something interesting there that I was going to get into a little later, which was the idea of the typo echoing through history and becoming part of something bigger. It's an interesting thought experiment in a way. It's like, what if a high schooler and all of their mistakes and their specificities were sanctified and written and rewritten, and a religion or a society was spun up from those beginnings? Something that came to mind as I was thinking about this was, in fact, organized religion, basically. When we look back at the roots of many religions, it does seem like a story, an origin story, a mythos that is written and rewritten down the centuries, written almost out of existence in its original form. And so you end up with strange stories that have echoed through centuries. And it seemed like 1000xRESIST and Iris's life being the source material on which this society was based just seemed like a really interesting thing to throw in the ring with that.
Yeah, I think very early on we were like, oh yeah, that's going to be super dark and maybe really funny. And a lot of the stuff that happens in the game is, sometimes the writers, like, we're just trying to make each other laugh. Which is maybe dark, reveal something about us, perhaps. We were very conscious of this. And I think we were really influenced, because like for many of us, we don't actually, organized religion is not like a big part of that. Well, that's not true, actually. Pinky does attend a kind of Buddhist temple with their parents. But for the rest of us, it was not like a big part of our lives. I know that my parents, or at least my dad, grew up Catholic, right, because of Hong Kong. And very early on, I think because of Spock, cast it off and then decided, he would become an atheist. And so that passed down to me. But I think the thing that really kind of, in terms of this kind of constant rewriting out of existence to a certain extent that you were saying, that kind of affect is really interesting to us.
Right. And it's a theme that is in the game in other ways too. The idea of things echoing down the ages, whether it happens to be events that have been woven into a religious ritual, or in one of the other big themes of the game, in generational trauma, in grandparents passing things down to parents who pass other things down to children, and that compound and that form the way that someone sees the world, whether they know that is what is happening or not. And there is a lot of that in the game. It is not something that I've ever seen in a game. It's not something that I've seen a lot of in any medium. So this is a really interesting subject to take on, and is delivered very interestingly and effectively in the game, I think. But I wonder if... So we've got two different aspects of things echoing down the ages here, whether it's ideas that are spun out of control, or whether it's experiences that go through generations. So it seems like, perhaps from what you've said about the way that the game came together, it does seem that these things might come as a consequence of the other, or as a collective line of thinking that you were all working on.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Like, in that part of it was process, being able to have an entire chapter before moving on to the next one. And so really the kind of production of the game was like making 10 little small games, I guess. And the other aspect of it is just kind of both for me and others in the writing team as well, kind of having family or roots in Hong Kong, and in the years between 2015 and 2020, going back more often, going back both for family reasons and also for work and art reasons, and learning about ourselves in that way. I mean, it sounds cliche this way, like you go back, of course you learn about yourself. Something that I say a lot is that for some reason in Vancouver, I'm occasionally late. Like, I don't know, for some reason I'm just always occasionally late, like by 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But in Hong Kong, I'm always early. And I don't know why. and trying to unpack that. I mean, part of it, of course, is the infrastructure is better, but there's this aspect where in Vancouver at night I'm always restless, but of course in Hong Kong I'm always tired at the end of the day and I fall asleep just fine. But here I have a hard time falling asleep all the time. And I think, we all had some kinds of experiences like this. I remember Connor going back for a performance and he's like always cold. He was always cold. Like he kind of always carries like a sweater around. But then he goes to Hong Kong and it's like, yeah, he obviously doesn't have that experience, right? Because it's not cold there. But there's like a level of humidity there that like just comforts his body. And yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about all these things that we were just like, is so embodied, where it's like, how come? And sometimes there's a romantic fantasy version of this where we're like, oh yeah, maybe the reason why I cannot fall asleep in Vancouver is because I just can imagine my grandparents partying it up and just never going to sleep. And they even when they were older in Vancouver, they were like playing mahjong for hours and hours and hours, right? Like people have similar experience of this with their grandparents, and that they just don't have a life at night that is not supported by the city or the culture, the infrastructure here in Vancouver. I guess it was that lens that we were thinking about how some of these things that happen in the past in the game will affect into the future, right? Ways that like may just reoccur again somehow, and we don't 100% understand why. And that, because of the nature of the sisters and the orchard, that they don't have like a real sense of active sense making. Like they're not, there's no activity. I know they have like theater, I guess.
And the one bar, a little bit like here in Reykjavik.
Bar. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So it's like a small town, like in the orchard, right? Like there's not that many places for them to go and unpack their experiences. That some of this stuff just keeps reoccurring. I think in chapter 6, when I think it was Blue that approached Noah from behind as well. And we had seen just like 2 people get got like from behind And one of the things that she says is like, oh, how dare you approach me from behind? Like, like it's just these things that maybe Noah is the only one. I mean, this is arguable, like that is keeping track of this and trying to sense make it a little bit and navigate it.
Yeah, Noah does seem like the one who has got a finger on the pulse of what is happening in this game. All of the sisters have their appointed roles, of course. I guess we are after the spoiler break, so we can assume that people have played it. But we have the main sisters with their different roles in this world. But something that seemed very funny to me was, again, if this culture is based on Iris, and Iris's whims and Iris's concerns at a certain age where life changed for Iris, the library seems to stop at a certain point. It's interesting that this library of knowledge is built from like a Mean Girls high schooler's perspective of what is important, and it's missing almost everything about humanity.
Yeah.
But it's built very much on Iris's whims and Iris's what seemed important to Iris at that age, and that's what they have to work with. And so there is a floundering and an adherence to taught meaning rather than felt meaning in the game.
Yeah. Yes. Totally. I 100% agree. and again, it was one of those things that, like, we just thought that was so darkly hilarious. And then, of course, we would spin that into try and find quote unquote real drama in that. But many of this is, much of that is like, oh my God, like that would be the worst time ever.
Right.
That would really be truly dark and funny.
Yeah, the more I'm talking to you, the more I'm seeing the humor. I mean, it was felt a little in the game, like the principal's office being the principal's office, like all of the little glimpses, the childlike drawings that Iris uses to send her decrees, or that people at least see. It is dark, it is surreal, and it's funny, but I think maybe the delivery of the game made me like...
It's pretty dry.
It's a little dry, Maybe I wasn't laughing out loud playing, but I mean, as we're talking about it, I'm seeing it,
Yeah. I mean, I like to think that the writers that worked on the game, like, were all pretty, at least to each other, were funny in different ways. And I that was one thing that we always, knew from clown and from theater, that you need to have a little bit of humor to have some of these like dramatic moments really land, and to have that be elastic, and to something that I remember, at least in the, like, I didn't actually study clown, but like I remember there was clowning class that I got to sit in and watch my friends do this, where they just repeatedly do the same thing until it's funny, and then it's not funny, and then it's funny again, and then it's not funny again, and then it's really funny again, and then you can't stop yourself from laughing, and then it's truly sad. Like going through this cycle of repetition and then having that kind of effectual response because of the duration and the repetition. If we didn't have just a little bit of moments where it was like kind of funny or silly, that some of that other stuff would not land as hard.
Yeah, and it comes with an atmosphere as well. These moments of lightness, you can imagine almost like the humanity of dark situations. If you're in the army with people and you are going out to war, you're probably also barracking, and you're probably also playing pranks on each other, even in this dark situation. So these moments of lightness and this sort of snappy, sisterly dialogue, and the to and fro between the characters, all whilst under the heavy weight of the situation that is unfolding and the society that they are in. It does lend a quality to the whole thing. But there is also the societal aspect of this game too. It's an oppressive society that the sisters find themselves in. Life is not fun. They are indoctrinated early. They are not given much latitude. They are forced into roles that maybe don't suit them. As healer and her crew are assigning roles to people based on not much information. And that read to me a lot like in line, in parallel with all of the other types of sadnesses and lightnesses in this game, it did seem like there was like a societal critique in here. You know, it's not dissimilar to people living in oppressive societies out here in the real world, and that you receive ideas, you're assigned your function, and you fulfill it, kind of thing. So
yes,
that was an interesting aspect of all of this as well.
Yeah, and like, I guess one of the things about the time skip, you know, we did not want to paint the time skip as like, oh yeah, like, okay, it's like even worse now. Like, there's some nuances to like some ways that this has gotten better. And one of them is that they do get to kind of choose their functions a little bit, and they're expected to do so. Of course, not every function is respected as the other one, right? But that was one kind of, you know, small improvement in the time skip that made sense, at least from like principal's level, because, you know, she was always assigned something that she felt like she was not performing well in or doing well or for her. And so it made sense to us that, you know, she would allow the sisters after this time, this post-Iris time, to explore their own functions. But of course it came with all sorts of other things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that kind of sense of it not being a straight line.
Yeah, I mean, it's a certain type of bad in the first half of the game. It's a different kind of bad in the second half of the game. And we have these characters that are just trying to navigate it with what the information that they are given. And it leads to such a specific sensation in the game. There is a sense of the grind of it all, of just trying to be a person and get through all of this stuff, with the various levels of pressure and difficulty that are placed on the sisters throughout the game. And like the idea of whether it ever really gets better or just turns into different kinds of bad, just seems to hang in the air.
Yeah.
I guess it relates a little bit to, you know, when I was talking about the style of voice acting that this game has, the sadness and melancholy of this game is present and vivid, I would say.
Yeah. One of the nice processes that we discovered during recording this game is that we always knew that there was like a lot of talent here in Vancouver, like, because they were our peers. And of course, there's the TV industry here as well, that a lot of things are shot here, both TV and movies. But this was the first time many of the performers or our peers are like kind of in a voice recording, voiceover setting. You know, sometimes they would come in and they would bring their theater voice. But the moment that we kind of were able to tune down the theater voice, you just kind of got to a place where it sounds as you hear them now. and that was like a really nice discovery, and seeing that play out through multiple different people, right? To go back on your thought also about how this is just another different future, like different kinds of bad. I think with each different type of bad, like the one good part of it is that they're a little bit more aware in the second half than in the first half. Like you have people like Chris, who's very cogent about their scenario in a way, and very openly cogent about it, as opposed to, say, Noah, who was very shadily, you know, keeping it very close to her chest. And there are other kind of shells who are definitely feeling the fallout of this like transition, or this time of like lots of stuff happening really quickly that was maybe traumatic, and things changed. That it did create a new kind of wisdom that wasn't in the first half. And, you know, I guess Blue is a part of that wisdom. And that was kind of an exciting thing for when we had to swap protagonists, I guess, halfway through the game. But it's more like on surface bad.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like checkpoints, there's like, it's like guns.
Right, and it's interesting to think that, I mean, as you have said, I did not know that this game was made chapter by chapter, and it does lend a lot of insight into the layering of it that we were talking about at the very start, and it does also explain perhaps how this game was able to be finished when it was and contain pandemic references the way that it did, because I guess you must have been developing through the pandemic. So you were able to write it in as you were going because of this method, I suppose.
Yeah. And like, as you can see, like chapter 1, which was mostly written at the height of the pandemic. And this is like, I think, pre-vaccine. that is where some of that stuff looms the largest. And then, you also get it in chapter 2, where it's just like, oh, we've been in our apartments for like a really long time. So, we totally know how to like look at the apartment again and just see it shift around. Cause like that's literally been our world for, a long time. But then I think as the game goes on, especially as you get to chapter 6, and this is strangely timed this way, and not like planned, obviously, where in the second half of the game, I believe that kind of lines up when people, at least in Vancouver, we were starting to come out of that hardcore lockdown phase. And I think many people had been vaccinated here. I mean, many people still wore masks, but, we felt like, especially outside, we felt, safe and we could go outside again and that there were people outside. Yeah, as the game continued, it's not kind of locked into that, like this was just straight up about the pandemic. It was also us experiencing the world afterwards and the fallout of it concurrently. And that would leak into the writing for sure.
I have a couple of questions here actually from people in the Discord. I opened it up to them to see what they would like to hear about too. And there's been a very lively conversation going on in there. People have been playing, people have been judiciously using spoiler tags to help each other play.
Oh, nice.
But also talking about their takes on the game. There's been quite a long strand of conversation about allegorical interpretations of the game, basically, especially people building on each other in their chat about it. The 50 being related to the states of the US, the occupants perhaps being related to China. There are all of these theories flying around in the Discord. And Patron Soccer said, I would be curious to know whether any of our speculated allegorical interpretations are intended, if that is not giving too much away.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'll say is that right now I am trying to not interfere with this activity, if that makes sense. Because right now what has been interesting and like what I've surprised I think me is how quickly some of these things are happening, how they're happening, right? And I feel like if I said anything, it would kill the energy. And I've been very careful not to close the loop, as I usually say. Like, I don't want to close the loop because I'm also reading these things and I'm learning more about the game. There's a really amazing co-host article about by Castel Please, and that was about like the game being for a generation that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, doesn't exist yet, I should say. And I read that and I was like, oh my God, I'm learning so much about, because for us, so much of this is like, sometimes we're just grasping for these things, right? Like as we're making them, like it's not always like, very cleanly and clearly sketched out and exactly one-to-one. Because if we just found that if that is the case, or if that became the case, it would kind of suck the air out of the room for the writer, right? They feel like they would not have any room to maneuver, any room to discover. And so we tried to leave a lot of room for that, right? Both on a plot line level, and a thematic level. And these discoveries would kind of happen more organically than say, this is the allegory.
Sure.
Maybe that's just a long answer for that. I think right now I will refrain from answering some of those, at least that particular question about the allegory, because I think that kind of stuff maybe should continue, and I'm going to leave it alone.
Yeah, sure. I get that. I absolutely get that. There is a great conversation happening about the game out there online. Maybe to simplify it and strip any specifics away from it, we could just say, is there any intended allegory in the game? And leave it at that.
I can definitely say there's intended allegory in the game, 100%. There's many. I can talk about at least, something that clicked for us thematically. And I can just comment about like the tears, the crying, the tear gas. That was something, for example, that's like super intended. Right. Yeah. So I would say definitely there's lots of intention in some of that, but there's also kind of allegories that we may have completely missed, that we were working subconsciously, that we that we're only kind of discovering now after the fact. And like yesterday, like I think I tweeted this out. Apparently resist is an anagram for sister.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man.
So were we all.
Yeah. And I was like, oh geez. Like of course I put a little winky like emoji there because like, you can hear it here first. Like that was 100% not, like it flew over our heads and also over the publisher's head. Like we've been like, looking at it for years now, and like we never made that connection.
Yeah, if only you could. I mean, I imagine a lot of people have been down after seeing that tweet, the thought experiment that, okay, so maybe the game when it was initially made was called 1000xRESIST. Maybe that wasn't sitting quite right. Maybe it was played with. Maybe someone had a brainwave one day. I've had this whole little like a timeline going in my head about that since I saw that tweet.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about that a little bit. It's like the 1000xRESIST name, and this is kind of this is how titles work for me, at least. I have a really hard time giving something a title after it's begun. And the way that this title appeared, I believe I was like walking in a parking lot. It appeared like 3 years before I even started the game. And I think I just wrote it down and I kind of kept it in my back pocket. And like I didn't, again, just something that like arrived for some reason. It started to take a life of its own in some way. And we had thought about changing it at some point during the game, but like it just didn't seem, because of course it's cumbersome to pronounce. Like people, also there's many ways that people are saying it. And I think that's kind of something interesting about it. Like it just kind of, people will remember it even if they come across it, or like looking on the page of it, it like has a shape. But yes, discovering that the anagram with the sisters and resist, I was also shocked.
I think that a lot of this, what we've talked about, is speaking to like a richness in this game that your working methods and the group of people you've assembled have managed to create, and all of these different voices over this period of time, and this chapterized sequential way of working seems to have allowed for so many threads of so many colors to be woven into this thing that it almost seems like alchemy, and hearing you talking about it is so revealing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in many ways, in the experimental performing arts, we're just obsessed with process, right? And we know that, like, for example, we cannot produce, if we follow, say, the traditional theater process, right? At least in Vancouver, that would mean like 3 weeks of rehearsal. You have a script, you hire your actors, your sound designers, you have a director, you do table reads, and then you do, all that all the way until like it's up on stage, and then you do a run. Like, if you follow that process, it'll be very, very, very difficult to expect or get a result that is literally not the same as all the other times you did that process, right? Like you can get like varying degrees of difference inside of the thing, but like large degrees of difference are almost just categorically not accessible because of that process that you undertake. And this is the same in, we understood this in music as well, when, if we're looking at Western notation of music, like we know that if we follow that process on a piece of paper in a specific way, like, like there's only so much difference that you can have. The possibility space, is quite crowded already and small. So for us, it's always, my obsession has always been like, well, can we just try to do it differently this way and see what the outcome is? Because, if you step back a little bit and just look at it, if this process is different, in these ways, you can at least guarantee a little bit of difference, right? But that being said, it's like playing with fire. So like, be careful. It's hard, right? You don't know if you'll land on your feet, and you don't know, because many times, you might follow a process like this. You can easily get lost in it. And we've seen this happen in the devised performing arts all the time. Like, it happened to us before. And you slowly gain experience to recognize how to steer yourself out of it. But it could be very difficult if you don't have that experience, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, an interesting. I've got a couple more questions here, and one of them I think leads from that actually. The process that you were describing from theatre and from performing arts and from improvisation is not one that I hear a lot about in games. At least, maybe people are iterating. Maybe they are iterating. They are experimenting, but they don't phrase it in the same way as you were phrasing it, and perhaps come from the mentality that you were coming from. So there is like an interestingly art-led strategy underpinning the making of this game. It does make me wonder about a question that Dovetail has here in how that clicks together with the process of releasing a game. Dovetail has a few questions here, but one of them is, I would love to know about how they got published through Fellow Traveler and what that process was like.
So it was in like April 2020. I had just finished a prototype of it, and this predates the company. So it was just myself at the time. And I think I would naively gave myself a deadline, very, very naively, because now since I've learned more about this, of trying to find a publisher in like 3 to 4 months. We did just find Fellow Traveler. Like, I had followed the games that they had released before, like NeoCab. Actually, I think In Other Waters had just come out maybe, but it was before Paradise Killer had come out. And I think we signed around the time that Paradise Killer came out. Like, I think we got really lucky, for sure. One where it's that, like, I think Fellow Travelers and the scout at the time, Felix, was very open to people coming from not a games background. That was a huge blessing. And then additionally, I think they had played the prototype and they found it interesting, which was shocking to me. Like, I wasn't sure what was going to happen here because, like, the prototype was really weird. Like, in many ways, a lot of the weirdness in the prototype did not make it into the game. Yeah, I mean, I think back to it, and I always think about this, about industries happening, where it felt like in 2020, it really seemed like you could send a cold email to a publisher with a build or a demo, and they would play it. Mm-hmm. And that fact already shocked me, like, from thinking about the music industry or like the literary industry, like, that you don't end up in a slush pile, and forever, was shocking. Even to get like a rejection email, say. So it felt a little bit like early 2000s music, mm-hmm. in that way, that you could send a demo tape and maybe somebody would actually listen to it. I don't know if that exactly answers your question as much as more like paints the picture there. Like, I got lucky with the timing. I also got lucky that Fellow Traveler was interested in this kind of thing. And we've been really lucky to have Fellow Traveler as a partner. Mm-hmm.
I'm super curious about your prototype now. Will it ever make it out there, do you think?
I don't know. I got to see if it still runs. I got to go back and check it out. Maybe one day I can release it. I think the Unity project itself, it exists, and I know a build exists, but kind of a strange thing.
It seems like amazing material for the director's cut.
Yeah. Like, find a special feature, like, see if I can include it somewhere, maybe upload it to itch.
Dovetail has a couple of other questions, so we'll be skipping around a little bit here. Mm-hmm. One of them is, why a video game as the medium for this story?
Right. I think growing up playing video games, the thing that I really attached to were just this feeling of place. And that kind of coherency of place and space, is very difficult to have in other mediums, because I think, you are not actually taking agency to move through them. And so I know a lot of people are talking about like, okay, the games are games because of all of these high-level interactivity things, but I think it's just like you being able to even move and exist and understand a virtual space is like a really special thing that we don't have in other mediums. I mean, you do this when you travel, when you go to, say, a new city for the very first time, and you start to begin to have a mental map of that city, and those things start to click together, and that becomes a part of your memory, and that becomes a part of your understanding of the place and a new understanding of a culture and like whatnot. But you can have that in video games as well, and you can get that all the time, which is like amazing to me. And so that was something that I think you see in the game. Like, we have one standing set, right? We have the main set, which is the one that everybody has a hard time navigating.
Yes.
The orchard, and that keeps getting redressed over time. And especially in chapter 6, it gets a huge redress, quote unquote huge. And if people did not exist in that space for so long, the meaning of that space changing and shifting all of a sudden is completely lost. And that's something that's really hard to do in, say, like a 2-hour film, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's felt much more viscerally in video games than it is in other mediums. I think it would have been really hard to tell this story in another medium, because you see that happen with all the sets in the game. Like, you see that happen to the apartment. What other sets are in this game?
Yeah, Old Town.
Old Town, yeah. You see it happen to Old Town. You see it happen to, and then even with the time changing, right? Like, you see it happen in the high school.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It does give you a feeling of unease. It makes me think of the Moomins. It makes me think of reading Moomins as a child and seeing them be swept away by a wave from their cozy house that you've come to love. And you're a child in a cozy house, and you think, oh my God, that can happen. And it fills you with a sense of a strange dread.
Yes.
That maybe that adds to that feeling of dread in the game, is that these places that seem permanent turn out to not be.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think I was talking to Colin, the programmer, about it recently, where I was just like, I think this happened in Beyond Good and Evil. Like, I believe the lighthouse, this is spoilers for Beyond Good and Evil.
Thank you.
Yeah, like I believe it's the orphanage in the lighthouse. It's been like a very long time. I think that gets ransacked or something, and that you can't go back. But, I mean, that's something that's really interesting also, now that I'm like thinking out loud about this, about games and why I think, even trying to attempt a diasporic narrative inside of games can be really powerful, is because there's a sense of not being able to go back to some place. And you get this in games all the time, right? Like in Final Fantasy IX, I think there's that fog or something that comes through, that you cannot go back to certain places afterwards. Or like that you cannot go back to Midgar after you leave it in Final Fantasy VII until later in the game. Or this other sense of, this thing that you have, where you inhabited that space, and then all of a sudden you cannot inhabit it anymore. You're not allowed. Like, I don't think that actually happens in film, obviously.
Not to the same degree, not to the same affecting emotional degree, I would say.
Yeah. And you may have that in immersive theater, where it's like all of a sudden you moved from one space to another and then you can't return. But then, of course, you can try to have duration of that level in immersive theater, but duration in immersive theater is very hard for many reasons. And in film is just expensive.
Sure.
Like, indie film is just extremely expensive. And then where does it go afterwards, right? Like, even if you had the money, like you're doing the festival circuit, and then what? I don't know. So from a very pragmatic place, it just seemed to me that video games is a place where you can actually have this kind of artistic expression.
That's a wonderful point. Absolutely. I mean, I think that 1000xRESIST for me joins a very short list of games, alongside things like Kentucky Route Zero. In fact, maybe it's a list of 2 games that do quite what these games are doing, where there is like a devoutly, deeply felt sort of experimentalism inside the game and so much in it. I wish that more games were made with this spirit. And I think that might be a good place for us to wrap up, actually. That's the last question from the Patreon. Yeah, what a game. Well done, Remy. Well done.
Thank you. I mean, I want to say on the podcast that, we're like the team and I were really grateful for how you've championed the game. And it's been really, we're really super grateful. Like we said, it was a really intense time to release a game. And I think it's been so helpful that there's just been, lots of people helping us kind of get the word out. And, you included and others like Natalie Flores and just so many. Yeah, I'm just super floored by all of that, really, because we were going to, the thought was that we probably released this weird game and it would just be like, okay, yeah, that was a weird artsy game. But I'm really happy that people are kind of responding to it. And I think, as you said, with Kentucky Route Zero, I don't think this game would exist if not for that game. I think I played that when I was like really, like, I think I was like 22 or something. I can't remember. But that was the thing that really opened my eyes to being like, oh my God, that's this. Is it happening? Right? Is it happening now? Like, like I've been waiting for this for like all my life, I feel. And that Kentucky Route Zero was the first, like, it took like another 10 years before I was able to begin even thinking about this game. But that original experience of Kentucky Route Zero was like convinced me that it was maybe possible that this could be a space for that kind of expression.
Absolutely. It's a game that just brings together so much, the sound and the writing of it, the ambition of it. Another game that was made coincidentally in chapters. And so maybe it was able to reflect on itself and grow in a similar way without that tight planning document to execute, able to blossom, able to grow, shift. And so you get the feeling of its life as a thing. And I think that's very much the same with 1000xRESIST. Yeah, and thank you to you for making the time to come on the show. As you say, it's a busy time. I really appreciate it. It's been great to talk about the game with you. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So there it is. That was the 1000xRESIST developer interview with Remy Siu of Sunset Visitor. I hope you enjoyed it. Well done if you made it all the way to the end. We had quite a long chat there. Really, really fun. So thanks very much to Remy. And thank you very much to you for listening. If you've been playing 1000xRESIST, I would like to hear from you. You can find me on social media as Gaming in the Wild. Let me know your plot theories and your thoughts on the game. I'd love to hear from you as well. I will also mention this is a Patreon-supported show, so if you have enjoyed this episode, you're welcome to support the podcast at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. There's a variety of tiers starting at just $1, and it helps me to make content like this. Other than that, likes and subscribes and comments are all appreciated, and I'll be back soon with a new video. So take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll see you on the next one.